The beginning of a story that changes lives first of all. I want to extend a simple invitation to you. Take a deep breath and imagine with me. Imagine a small, simple place where people wake up early, work hard, and return home without imagining that, on that same dusty ground, someone capable of changing the history of the world would tread. There were no palaces, no riches, no fame. There were only ordinary people,
and among them, someone seemingly ordinary, but with an extraordinary heart.
This story begins like this: silent, discreet, almost invisible. And perhaps that's exactly why she's so powerful. Because the greatest revolutions in humanity didn't start with shouting, not even with crowds. They began within a restless heart that refused to accept suffering as something normal. Today, I'm going to tell you the true story of a saint who inspired a revolution, but not a revolution made of weapons, hatred, or violence. It was a revolution made of love, example, courage, and daily choices. Perhaps as you listen to this story, you're thinking, but I'm just an ordinary person. I'm no saint. I don't have great resources. And that's exactly where this story begins to touch our lives. Because this saint was also just an ordinary person. He felt afraid. He felt pain. He cried. He thought about giving up. But at some point, he made a choice that changed everything. She decided to live according to her beliefs, even when no one was watching.
And that is what transformed
his life into such a powerful example that has spanned generations.
Perhaps you're watching this video because you're tired. Perhaps you're going through a difficult time.
Perhaps you've lost someone, failed at something important, or are simply feeling lost. If that's the case for you, stay until the end. This story isn't just about a saint from the past. It's about you,
about me,
about all of us. Because she proves that you don't need to be perfect to inspire. You just need to be genuine.
This
story begins in a time when helping others was not valued.
On the contrary, people were afraid, prejudiced, and distrustful of one another.
Everyone only cared about their own problems. And it was in this setting that this saint appeared, not with long speeches, not with empty promises, but with actions so simple that even a child can understand.
He believed that every human being has value,
even the sick person,
even the forgotten one, even the rejected one.
And it was this different way of
seeing the world that started something much bigger than he ever imagined.
Throughout this video, you will learn about real stories of overcoming challenges, early discoveries, and emotional support that show how the life of this saint touched real people.
People who were on the verge of giving up, people who had lost hope, people who felt invisible. And little by little, you'll realize something incredible. The revolution didn't happen all at once. She started small,
with a gesture,
with a choice,
with a heart willing to love when the world chose to ignore. Perhaps you're wondering how. What does this story have to do with me today in the modern world?
The answer is simple. All.
We live in a time when people are increasingly connected,
and at the same time, increasingly alone.
A time when we judge quickly, listen little, and forget to look into each other's eyes. This saint lived in a completely different context, but faced something very similar: indifference.
And it was against her that he made his greatest revolution.
Hearing this story might make you want to change something small in your routine. Maybe you'll want to treat someone differently. Maybe you'll realize that you too can be an inspiration, even without realizing it. That's how this story works. She doesn't force you to do anything.
She's simply inviting you to reflect, and if you allow it, it can plant a seed within you.
Therefore, before continuing, I ask you one simple thing: open your heart.
Let this story reach you.
And remember, every great revolution begins small.
Sometimes it begins with someone who decides not to turn a blind eye to the pain of another.
And that's exactly how the story of the saint who inspired a revolution begins. When an ordinary life becomes a silent revolution, the true revolution inspired by this saint did not begin when people started talking about him.
It began much earlier, when nobody was looking.
After a simple childhood and a youth marked by loss,
pain, and questioning, he reached a turning point in his life, a moment when any ordinary person would have chosen the easiest path: to take care of themselves, try to survive, and move on without getting involved in other people's problems. But it was precisely there that he made the choice that changed everything.
Instead of shutting down, he decided to get closer. Instead of ignoring the pain, he decided to look into each other's eyes. Instead of complaining about life, he decided to.
This saint
realized something very early on. People weren't just suffering from a lack of food, money, or health. They were suffering because they felt invisible, abandoned,
worthless.
and he understood that, before any extraordinary miracle, there was an even greater miracle to make someone feel seen.
It started simply, small.
Almost imperceptible.
He visited sick people when no one else wanted to come near.
He sat beside them.
He listened to their stories.
He held their hands.
Often, he said nothing. And that was enough.
There are real accounts of people who stated that that simple gesture, someone staying by their side without rushing, was the first step in them regaining the will to live. And here lies a profound lesson. Emotional support can be more powerful than any speech.
Over time, he began to take in people rejected by society.
People who were seen as a problem.
People who carried labels. People that nobody wanted around.
While many pointed the finger, he extended his hand. While many were walking away, he was drawing closer.
And that started to bother me. Some people said he was wasting his time. Others said it was pointless.
Still others called him naive.
But something curious began to happen.
The people he took in began to change.
Not because he forced them,
but because someone finally believed in them. A man known for his violence, after witnessing the example of this saint, began to reflect on his own behavior.
Gradually, he abandoned his aggressive ways and started helping others who had lived as he once had.
This transformation was so profound that people who had feared him began to seek his help.
This is a true story, repeated in different forms throughout the life of this saint.
The revolution did not take place in public squares.
It happened inside people. And that's how the movement grew, without a strategy, SEM marketing, without imposition, just as an example.
Other people started walking alongside him.
Not because he asked them to, but because they
felt like it. They saw how he treated the most vulnerable and thought, I could do that too, and suddenly, what seemed like an isolated gesture became a way of life.
People started sharing what they had. They started listening more.
They started judging less. They began to understand that helping others was not a waste of time, but a gain in humanity. This saint never promised a life without suffering.
On the contrary, he showed, through his actions, that pain is part of the journey, but no one needs to walk alone.
At various times, he himself felt tired.
There were days when he thought nothing was changing.
There were nights when he cried silently, questioning whether it all made sense.
This part of the story is important because it shows that even the greatest inspirations face doubts. The difference is that he didn't let doubt paralyze him. He continued, even though I'm scared, even though I'm tired, even without recognition. And little by little, the fruits began to appear. Entire communities began to act differently. The climate of violence has decreased. Solidarity has increased.
People who were once invisible have become respected. All this because someone decided to live according to their beliefs.
This is the essence of the revolution that this saint inspired. It was not a revolution against people.
It was a revolution against indifference. And perhaps this is the most difficult revolution of all,
because it demands something simple, yet challenging: coherence. Consistency between what is said and what is done.
Between what one believes and what one lives.
This saint didn't change the world all by himself, but he proved that a life lived with love can inspire many others. And that is why, to this day, his story remains alive.
Not like some distant legend, but it's a daily invitation for each of us to do our part.
The revolution that starts with you after hearing this story. Perhaps you are silent inside.
Perhaps something has touched your heart.
Perhaps you are wondering why such a simple life managed to span centuries and still touch people today. The answer is simpler than it seems. This saint didn't change the world because he was perfect. He changed the world because he was consistent. Consistent with what he believed, consistent with what I felt, consistent with what he was doing, even when no one was watching. The great revolution he inspired didn't happen overnight. It was built in the silence of small gestures, repeated every day. Gestures that didn't make the news, gestures that didn't earn immediate applause, gestures that only made sense to those with an attentive heart.
And perhaps that's exactly why this story is so relevant today.
We live in a fast-paced world, where everything needs to be big, quick, and visible.
A world where many people want to change everything, but few are willing to accept God's timing.